Everybody, good afternoon, good morning or good evening, wherever you are joining us from, and welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar looking at how 3 years of remote and flexible working has changed public services. My name is Richard Johnston and I'm the Executive Editor of Global Government Forum, which is a media website and company focused on bringing together public and civil servants from around the world to share best practice to tackle common challenges and help implement best practice solutions. And this webinar is on a very interesting topic that we know many governments are grappling with. To take just one example, 3 years ago here in the UK, we were just 5 days into the first, and at the time, unprecedented lockdown that was in effect to protect citizens from the COVID-19 coronavirus. And I know many other countries were either already in similar circumstances then or would soon introduce them. This move to lockdowns and other restrictions required public and civil servants to switch to working from home at speed, and in the months and indeed years since, we've seen governments adapt to working first remotely and then, as the immediate threat from the virus receded, to working flexibly. That's because many public servants found that working from home allowed them to have a better work-life balance, and indeed many governments found that they were able to work just as effectively when set up remotely. However, the pandemic did, of course, have an impact on many public services, and many are now working to recover from backlogs. And many public services themselves have not yet had time to adapt their systems to the age of flexible working. So in this session, we're going to look at what the impact of remote and flexible working is on public services and what does need to be done to structure them in the way that makes the most of the new normal, to use a dreaded phrase that I can't avoid. So we'll be looking at how governments have changed how they work compared to 2020, and the evidence on what works and what doesn't work in remote and flexible working. We have a great panel to discuss this topic, and I will introduce them to you in a moment. But before I do, I also want to invite you to get involved. We'd be keen to hear from you how your organisation is working now, 3 years on from the onset of the pandemic. How is your organisation thinking about how best to structure or restructure services for the flexible working age? And what do you think would be best? And how do you think you can build and maintain integrated and engaged teams when people are working in different places and using platforms just like this one? So please get in touch using the Q&A function throughout the session, and we will share as many of your questions with our panel as we can throughout. So do let me introduce that panel now. First up joining us today is Alison Hykins Azevedo. Alison is the Deputy Commissioner for the Public Building Service of the US General Services Administration, headquartered in Washington, D.C. In this chief operating role, Alison oversees a portfolio of federally owned and leased real estate encompassing 370 million square feet. And prior to her elevation to the PBS Deputy Commissioner role, Alison was the Assistant Commissioner of PBS Leasing, so is well placed for this discussion. Hello, Alison, and welcome. We're also joined today by Stephen Derry, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Real Property Services in Public Services and Procurement Canada, and Julie Waddle-Smith, the Director General Service Lead and Accommodation Management and Workplace Solutions, also in Public Services and Procurement Canada. In Stefan's role as Assistant Deputy Minister, he is responsible for the delivery of an entire suite of real property services to 102 Canadian federal departments and agencies. This covers office, administration, project management and real estate services, as well as the management of multiple federal engineering assets and the acquisition and disposal of federal real property. Stefan's able to join us for the first 30 minutes of today's webinar, and then Julie will take part in the Q&A portion that I mentioned. Julie has been Director General in the real property branch since January this year and is leading on the implementation of the vision for modern workplaces in the Canadian federal government. So thank you both for joining. We were also hoping to be joined today by Emmanuel Kigomo, who is the Chief Director in the Department of Public Services and Administration in South Africa, but Emmanuel's having some connection difficulties. But I'll mention that he may join us at some point, hopefully, if those get resolved, and I will introduce him when he does. And we are also joined today by Christian Rogues, the Deputy Director General in HR Operations in the European Commission's Directorate General for HR and Security. Christian is in charge of the operations in the Director General for Human Resources, and from selection and recruitment to career and well-being. And prior to this role, Christian worked in a number of roles in the European Commission, including working on, among other things, the reform of the staff regulations and legal issues, and indeed measures to deal with the COVID pandemic for the Commission as an employer. So again, very well placed for this conversation. Thank you, Christian, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to hear some opening comments from each of our panel before we get into that question and answer portion that I mentioned. So please do keep your ears open for any questions that you would like to ask to follow up from these presentations, and do send them in using the Q&A button. And I am going to ask Alison for her opening thoughts first. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard, and for that warm welcome. Certainly my pleasure to be here as a panelist at this global government forum. I really feel that these types of collaborations present really helpful information to all of us to better understanding the future of the workplace. Most of us have been at this a really long time, and I think this period of time, post-pandemic, we're dealing with probably the greatest opportunities and also the greatest challenges. As Richard mentioned, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Public Building Service at the General Services Administration. We're the landlord for the civilian federal government in the US. And we acquire space, and we also build and design, build, and construct space for federal tenants. So in that capacity, we also are with those tenants in those facilities for the life of those agreements. So facilities management is also a key aspect of our operation. Over 8,700 federally owned and leased assets under our custody and control, and 1.1 million employees, federal employees and contractors actually are housed in those buildings. 500 of those are historic properties as well. So I've spent the majority of my career on mission delivery in our regional offices before coming to headquarters. And it's been a really interesting shift in terms of our opportunities to right size and reshape our portfolio. If you go to slide 2, I just want to highlight a few things here on what we're focused on. Designing for people, we're trying to put people and agency mission first and foremost, not just looking at the puzzle pieces that need to be put together in terms of blocks of vacancy, but really those partnerships and collaborations first and foremost with the employees that are actually delivering the mission. How we get there, we need to have tighter relationships with our stakeholders, both at the our budget office of management and budget, so they have awareness into the types of funding requirements that are necessary to do the reshaping, as well as communities. Obviously, our presence is significant in many of the metropolitan cities, and us not going to those facilities does have a major community impact. And then, of course, the industry. We have very close partnerships with our industry partners who actually deliver 90% of the work that we do. So how we get there, we believe, is through those enhanced relationships and open communication, because it's a major change management activity. If you'll go to the next slide, here's our real property, our historic, and our arts program broken out into these categories. And I just wanted to say, designing for people, first and foremost, driving the portfolio and delivering on performance are the key things here of our strategic plan. We spent a lot of time developing that 5-year strategic plan. We hadn't had one for a number of years. And I believe having something like that to fall back on, to socialize, and actually get everybody, all of our employees, on board with where we're going in the future. With a team of 5,500 people, it's really important that we make these changes and we make them as rapidly as possible. And understanding where we're going is the key idea here. So PBS, right space, right place, and best price. This is really helping guide our teams, support our customer agencies in making some really difficult decisions. If we go to slide 5, I wanted to highlight a few of the things here on seamless and secure technology. When we're talking about high quality environmental conditions, this is really important. And there's so many advances in what we can actually design and build these days compared to when these structures were built. More than, I mentioned, 500 historic properties, in many cases 30, 40, and 50 years ago. Right place, structurally efficient and geographically located for mission delivery. A lot of our agencies, most of their staff might not be where the work is actually delivered. So rethinking and help them think about where best their mission delivery can occur throughout the country. And then, of course, best price. The most cost-efficient facilities with minimal operational risk, and this maximizes our return on investment. So optimization for us is that financial piece, but really finding the right places, the right buildings that we want to invest in with limited capital, and then again, back to the right space for our agencies to best deliver their mission. Technology obviously plays a key role in all of this and is really central to having employees deliver the mission. So looking at the new technological advancements and incorporating those in the designs is something that we're really keen on. If you go to slide 6, this just gives a few examples of how we're really looking at rethinking workplace delivery. Telework options are expected. GSA was in a fairly good place with our telework, with our technology, because obviously that's the main obstacle to making hybrid work. And I feel like many of our agencies had not made those investments. So first bringing them along in terms of identifying the technology that's necessary to make hybrid work effective. The collaboration methods, different applications, experimentation, piloting different things has been another investment that we made in time, and focusing on culture with intensity, communicating more than we ever have with our employees, having a feedback loop to understand what's really working for them. And a lot of this has to do with how well our supervisors are able to connect with employees, because at the end of the day, the supervisors and the management chain is responsible for delivering the work. Increasing competition for talent. I think we're all struggling for that same recruitment and retention aspect of how we run the business. So making attractive work environments and really focusing on the proper purpose-driven culture is just as important as the salaries that we're able to offer in the federal government. We all see these workplace trends evolving. The past trends are also not as relevant as they were. Private and public sector organizations are discovering the future work at the same time. Private sector, our vendors, they don't have the answers either. So a lot of our efforts are big experiments. And lastly, again, technology's role in really expanding how, when, and where the work is accomplished. Employees are expecting equivalent or better technologies than what they have had in the past. And sometimes in their home office environment provides even for better connectivity than in the bricks and mortar spaces that we have worked in the past. Moving to slide 7. Again, our opportunities are abundant, and whether we're working in the home, whether we come for collaboration meetings on demand, more flexible environments, in our vehicles, satellite office networks in flex space, And then again, back to our home environment. All these ways of working are paramount to how we design the future of space. We also are focused on going to a net zero portfolio, green buildings that are energy efficient, along with zero emission fleet of our vehicles, both for ourselves and for our customer agencies. And then physical and cyber security. Can't say enough about the investments there, both in our buildings and with our IT systems, ensuring that they're properly safeguarded. Just a couple more slides to get some ideas out here. I mentioned it earlier, but our key to success in all of this is the collaboration, partnership in everything we do with our industry, with our communities, and with our agency partners. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today and an interesting panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. That's a really interesting presentation to kick us off. I think the collaboration point is a great one, and one that I'm sure we might revisit. And it chimes nicely with what you said about public sector and private sector discovering the future of work at the same time. So it's not that governments are alone in this kind of voyage of discovery to find out what works. And as the private sector does, hopefully we'll be able to exchange knowledge across institutional boundaries in different sectors as well to build the best systems that work for everyone. That's a great contribution to get us started. Thank you very much. I will ask Stefan for his opening thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. We're really pleased to be here today for today's discussion. We look forward to discussing the hybrid work model that the Government of Canada has implemented and sharing what this means for Canada's public service. Prior to the pandemic, the Government of Canada, through its Department of Public Service and Procurement Canada, had already started modernizing its workplace to leverage the benefit of activity-based workplace and begin modernizing our portfolio and transitioning to hybrid work model. The pandemic represented a strategic opportunity for Government of Canada to accelerate this work and to offer tailored, flexible workplace that are modernized with functional layout and the latest technology to its public service employees. In other words, this was an opportunity to rethink how public servants work and where they work. In the past, most of the employees work almost exclusively from federal office and work site. We had a little bit of teleworking, but that was not the norm. But the pandemic proved that we could work differently and that public servants were able to successfully deliver services to Canadians while working outside of the traditional office. We know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for the variety of function across the Government of Canada, but we believe the hybrid work model, which allow for a combination of telework, in-person work at a variety of workspace, is a practical way to offer employee flexibility and better work-life balance. Can we move to slide 2, please? With that in mind, we have been designing our space so they are well equipped to support activity-based working principle, including enclosed and open space to encourage collaboration and support individual work style. While the hybrid work models support flexibility, it also takes into consideration the value of working together in person to collaborate, innovate, build trust, and create a sense of community. I personally work from the office 2-3 days a week, and I really enjoy my interaction with colleagues. I feel a renewed energy post-pandemic at the workplace as more and more people start really to experiment what hybrid means. We move from a remote by necessity to a hybrid by design. Aside from building an office portfolio with modern and cost-effective workspace and keeping the well-being of employee top of mind, this gives us also an opportunity to advance the Government of Canada priority regarding greening, accessibility, and reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people. Can we move to slide 3, please? Through our future of work agenda, as we expand and modernize our workspace, we are redesigning greener, accessible, inclusive, and barrier-free environment for public servants and the public. On the environment front, we are working to reduce our carbon footprint by transitioning to greener form of energy and divesting ourselves of underutilized space. We have also been integrating greening into our portfolio plan and investment decision by encouraging the adoption of green energy, reducing energy use and carbon emission in our buildings, and using innovative products and services that have less of an environmental impact. By continuing to make our workplace accessible and inclusive, we are moving towards the goal of making PSPC's workplace fully accessible by 2040, as per the Accessible Canada Act. Additionally, we continue to engage with Indigenous partners to advance reconciliation by having meaningful consultation and building stronger relationship and strategic partnership. This supports Canada's Truth and Reconciliation mandate and provides a path for government, as well as Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, to create a joint vision of reconciliation throughout Canada. These are just a few examples of our commitment to these priorities, and through which we hope to inspire and lead the way in Canada and internationally. It is personally important to me that our return to the workplace in an hybrid work model supports flexibility, productivity, and wellness for employees. We believe it's going to create a magnet for employees to come and be interested in working for the Government of Canada. I know we will continue to build on our successes and lessons learned, and adjust planned as needed. In other words, we will continue to evolve with our partner from the private sector as we really embrace hybrid work. And this is something that I really like to see, that we evolve together. Today's discussion is an opportunity to share perspective so that we can better imagine the workplace of tomorrow. I look forward to exchanging with you on this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Great contribution there, picking up a few of those points: flexibility, productivity, and wellness as the kind of three tenets of people returning to the office. I think is a great focus, and as you said, making the workplace a magnet that people want to come in the office when their tasks require it, and yeah, how kind of public services can embrace the world of hybrid work. We're definitely going to dig into to more of that throughout the session, so thank you for that contribution. We have been joined by Emmanuel, so let me just introduce him fully before we get his contribution. Emmanuel Kigomo is the Chief Director in the Department of Public Service and Administration in South Africa, where he heads the Bathopele or People First unit, with a focus on the professionalisation of the public service. Emmanuel's first role in government was with the Office of the Presidency, from 2000 to 2003, and he's also worked in a range of different departments before his current role. He has coordinated the National Bathopele Excellence Awards since their inception in 2013, and is passionate about professionalising the public service. Fantastic that you've been able to join us, Emmanuel, and if you can share your opening thoughts.
Thank you, Richard, and hello to everybody who's joined the platform. I hope you can hear me now. I did struggle a bit with connection. Thank you. Yes, just to introduce the subject, let's move to the next slide, please. Thank you. My immediate response to this question or to this topic is that in South Africa, we are not yet at the point where public services would have changed for good because of the COVID years. And there are reasons that I'm giving there for that assertion. Firstly, the way in which our public services are provided And secondly, the manner in which the public services are received. The two areas are actually giving us that the notion that we're not yet ready to say that we've changed public services for good. But I must say there's been some progress in terms of how we are providing services. Sorry. Firstly, there are a number of mechanisms that have been introduced that would have then lead to improved access to services. And for me, the major point there is that public services need to be accessible to the recipients, which is the public in this case, irrespective of who it is. Could be another company out there, could be individuals in society, it could be a whole community. But if public services have improved, then the beneficiaries or those who need the services need to have access to those services. Next slide, please. Public services, as I said, they have not changed. They are still the same in terms of what is it, for example, that the public needs. There are health services that are needed, education, access to electricity, access to healthy water and proper sanitation, connectivity, just access to Wi-Fi's and such technologies. Access to business opportunities for entrepreneurs out there. Whatever the government has been providing, that has not changed at all. So, but the COVID years have, of course, introduced for us that the possibility rather that remote working or remote access can be improved. And I think for me, that's where the change is, but we're not yet 100% at the point where we could say we are leveraging on technologically advanced methods of providing services. We are still a bit long way to get there. As I said, the access to IT mechanisms is a challenge. Connectivity. I'm in a library. It's one of our modern libraries, the National Library. Yet I was struggling to connect, and it didn't make sense why I was struggling. So the library should be the first area where connectivity should be much more quicker and accessible. Anyway, personal resources at an individual level, at the government level. For example, there are departments that would have prioritized different things rather than spending on accessing technology. So that puts a bit of a strain on using modern technological access to services. We have departments that are providing IDs, or rather, let me say documentation, Home Affairs being one. There's a differential development. There are documents that are accessible where one can actually apply, fill up your forms, send them electronically, but then the collection needs to be in person so that the authentication of identities can be exercised. So that we do have, but there are other services. For example, for prepaid services like prepaid water that is provided to townships around South Africa, the providers of the water insist that there must be identification that needs to be authenticated. So they have not provided a fully remotely possible way of accessing the service. In other words, with electricity, for example, one can pay via your bank, ATM, or even using one's phone, can pay for electricity. But with prepaid water, that is not the case. So there are some services that are fully automated. There are some that are partially automated for various reasons. Few sectors, as I say, they are able then to provide public services remotely. One can pay their traffic fines, license renewals completely online, and then even get the renewal stick on the car to show that it's been renewed. But there are services that one cannot do that. Next slide, please. And no doubt, remote systems have improved communication that I acknowledge and access to some services, as I've indicated. I don't know whether we are now in 6IR, but I know we have passed the 4IR stage, where services now can be provided with more speed, irrespective of geographical spaces. We no longer constrained by geography. So that we acknowledge. The reach of technological development, unfortunately, in our area, in the rural areas, especially the remote rural areas, is less. Connectivity, we've got the connectivity, but then the challenge is people who use the services have limited access to it, whether it's due to their resources or where, for example, if it's a government department, the resources provided to the particular outlet are not adequate. Personal resources are limited. Load shedding, we've got those challenges. Unfortunately, where electricity just zoom, it's gone for 3 to 6 hours a day, and inadequate managerial expertise, where we need to deploy managers who are flexible, but who are also knowledgeable and can deal with challenges in a more dynamic way. We don't have a lot of such managers. Unfortunately, in most cases, managers stick to regulations, and regulations hamstring development and the speed in which people can access services. Next slide, please. Okay, is that the last slide? I'm saying here in the last slide, in conclusion, provision of public services has not changed for good. Remote working has not changed public services for good, though we acknowledge that there are some changes here and there. There are some developments and opportunities for development. Systems like we're using now, Zoom, the Webex, MS Teams, these are handy systems that we are using, and these can actually improve the manner in which, for example, we interact. Our communication can improve much better, especially where we need to exchange ideas, where we need to have intense workshops with particular cohorts of workers and impart knowledge and expertise. However, inadequate funding impacts on the use of extended use of such mechanisms. Limited personal access affects accessibility, as I said, although our communities still prefer face-to-face means of communication. The executive public service management is skeptical about public servants working remotely, mainly because of discipline issues. And therefore, our executive management is skeptical because they don't think productivity will improve. Supervision of people working remotely, the mechanisms are still not watertight. So there's a challenge there that we're still working on such things to tighten up. And of course, trust among workers themselves. If I don't trust my colleague, then especially if I'm a supervisor, it becomes difficult to release them to work on their own. So these are just some of the issues that are impacting on us having a complete change in terms of the provision of public services. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. That's really interesting. I think that's a great perspective to share about the difficulties and obstacles that governments can face to kind of make the kind of transformations that we are talking about today. And some of the reasons perhaps you might not want to. A lot of people do prefer services face to face, and I think that's something I want to pick up with the rest of the panel once we have heard our final opening contribution from Christian, who I'll pass over to now. Christian.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I'm very happy to be with all of you today and all the panelists. I must say it's a great opportunity that you offer to us. In the European Commission, we very often exchange with other international organizations. And even recently we did with United Nations. And we have already compared our management of the crisis and the evolution into hybrid working within this international context. But today, you offer us a huge opportunity to see how Canada, US, South Africa, and Europe, and I'm sure if you had Asia, it would be the same. It's very striking to me how we face the same crisis and how we reacted exactly in the same way. And already for me, it's a first lesson to learn. It has been a global crisis and we had a global reply, a global response. Maybe let me drive you through a bit of history of what we are and why we had to move and why, through the reaction, we are a year after we moved to a hybrid working system with a dramatic change in our way of working, and people are very pleased within the Commission. And I think I would like to pinpoint this aspect, why people are pleased and why it is there to last. And sincerely, because people are pleased. That's the most important aspect. So a bit of history. The Commission is a 32,000 people organization. And we are, of course, we have a specificity maybe for public administration in Europe, at least, to attract most of our workforce from the private sector, law firms, banking sector, essentially communication and IT. So we need to be attractive. But what we used to be before the pandemic is typically people working sometimes late in the day or in the night, but in the office, in individual offices, having a lot of missions, because obviously we're based in Brussels and Luxembourg mainly. And of course, we had to reach out to the citizens and to our stakeholders throughout Europe and through the world, obviously. So a lot of missions, a typical management organized by units, units composed of, let's say, 10 to 20 people in average. So a very, close hand management. And with the pandemic, actually, the pandemic came, as a triggering point, because we had thought of changing this model. What we wanted to keep is to be an attractive place for expats. Expats are very important for us because we want to create, and that's maybe a difference vis-a-vis solid nation as you are among the panelists, is we wanted to create actually European spirit. It's very important that people come from different places of Europe and build something different. Sometimes we are criticized to be a bubble, but we want actually this bubble we want to see this bubble in a positive manner, a manner which is a true European culture. So we wanted that, and that's something we wanted to keep. So we had thought of evolving, and our President von der Leyen, launched the Green Deal, an operation for basically saving carbon dioxide emissions throughout Europe, and we wanted to walk the talk. So we had as an ambition to reduce our carbon emission by 60%. We wanted to have a new HR strategy, wanted to be attractive for the future, having a growing concern about the budget availability. And so we wanted to be more flexible in order to be more attractive, selling a bit our culture to compensate for maybe the most difficult aspect on the paycheck that we were facing. And part of those savings as well, we're thinking was to reduce the carbon footprint. It was to reduce our building space. Well, the COVID came in, and if I may say, of course, it had a lot of dramatic consequences, sometimes tragic consequences. But for the administration, our administration, I must say it has a positive impact because it obliged us to change from day one to day two, not to the model we wanted initially, because of course we went to remote, but it allowed us for 2 years to build up where we are today. And I explain myself. We had, of course, to go remote, we started to work virtually. We'll never, before we were renting huge conference centers to meet, you know, staff, stakeholders, experts from member states. Now we meet a lot virtually. We don't need as many missions as before. And you saw that it's interacting with our greening ambition, because we don't need to make as many missions to use as many planes as we used to do. We wanted flexibility for staff. We had, because during the pandemic, people learned to work, to be available all the time, but not to be in presence available. And so we had this rigid system of being, you know, present for a certain number of hours. Now what matters is to be available. We don't measure presence in the office anymore. We don't mind that. That's not interesting. Of course, we had to train managers to of course, take care of that change. That was important because managers were used to monitor presence. Now they are used to monitor output. And that's quite a different change and a different type of management. I could count many other aspects. Of course, we were working in individual offices. Colleagues were teleworking massively. We didn't need these offices anymore. We didn't need as much canteen as before. So we reduced the space and we made it more flexible. So we went from individual offices to what we call dynamic collaborative spaces. So open space and hot desking at the same time. Nobody has a reserved space anymore. But what we can do is we can group more easily across the board, no more by units, but across the board, whenever you have a project, you can put yourself with a booking tool wherever you want in the various offices that we kept. So we, as you see, thanks to the pandemic, and I could detail of course some more, we went from a very rigid system to a very flexible system. Of course, we could imagine that it could have created a lot of resistance and a lot of you know, beyond the resistance, maybe a lot of unsatisfaction among our staff. So what we wanted to do is to explain a lot. And the 2 years of pandemic were as well an opportunity to explain where we wanted to head. Why we could actually, by reducing our gray carbon emissions, by not building buildings, by reducing our emissions, we could keep the same contacts with the stakeholders, bringing the same satisfaction to colleagues, and reducing indeed our emission by 60%, which is our target by 2030. So we try to explain to colleagues, and we had 2 years to explain. So we spent a lot on communication. And the result was, so we launched our new system globally for dynamic collaborative space, for new type of missions, for flexible working days. Colleagues just need to be available. They need to be 2 days a week in the office only. And it's up to managers to decide exactly how long people, depending on the service, of course, they need to be present in the office. I mean, I'm supervising the medical service, for example. Obviously, nurses during the moment of vaccination, they needed to be 5 days in the office, but only, so exceptional cases, of course, you have to cater for. But simply to say that, so we moved ourselves into this new environment. We wanted to monitor, and we immediately launched a survey. 2-3 months after the implementation in April last year, we launched a survey, and we had already a very good result. It's thanks to the massive communication we made, we had actually a 60% satisfaction rate. Globally, even for the open space, which was quite a change for people, where there was arguably the most reluctancy. We worked a lot on these as well, because we knew that some people liked some elements more. Managers were not so pleased in terms of the lack of human interaction. They found their job more difficult. So we had some drawbacks. So that was about in June. And since then, we worked on working the type of spaces. So not to have a one-size-fits-all. So we worked on accommodating different solutions for colleagues as well. With handicap, for example, we worked with having better tools in order to get better sound insulation, for example. We worked as well on temperature. Of course, we had the gas and energy crisis coming in. So we worked on moving to more modern buildings, A-type saving energy type of buildings. Working on this make that our rate improved drastically. So from 60% satisfaction in June, we are at 83% satisfaction now. And the thing which is very interesting, it is the same satisfaction rate for staff as for managers. And not only on well-being, of course, we have 10 indicators on, of course, work-life balance, well-being. We were expecting this to be positive. But it's positive as well on performance, on use of resources, on interaction with stakeholders. So a lot of what we were afraid did not happen. And I think it was based on the fact that we had this huge convergence of opportunities at the same time, and we communicated effectively vis-à-vis our staff. Now, what remains to be done is still some training for managers, I must say, because of course, moving from purely management of presence in the office to purely output is a challenge for some managers, especially depending on your age, your grade, your experience. And there we really work on this, on reshuffling a bit our management structure and on training, of course, our managers, which is the main challenge ahead of us. But that's what I wanted basically to share with you. And again, fascinated to see that the same things happen everywhere at the same time.
Thanks, Christian. That's a great overview, and I think the points around management are particularly interesting. We hear that quite a lot in these in our coverage of kind of the move to flexible working, is that perhaps employees are very clear that flexible working is good for them and want to kind of see it entrenched, as it were, but perhaps the other side of the table, if one looks at it that way, the managerial side isn't as kind of clear on what they need. So it's interesting that you have kind of got those satisfaction measures, and they can measure what people think of that. And I will return to that in a moment, if I may, because we do have questions coming in, and one of them is on that point. But I really liked Emmanuel's presentation around the kind of framing question of our webinar about whether these arrangements and indeed kind of public service delivery overall has kind of changed for good as a result of the pandemic. And I just quickly wanted to run around the panel and get people's views on that. I'll start with Alison. We haven't heard from you in a while, Alison. Is the presumption in the GSA that these are kind of changes that will become permanent and will be embedded, the kind of flexible working model? We have had President Biden talking about, you know, more face-to-face services and things like that at various points in his presidency. But where do you see the change being a kind of forever change from here?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I feel like it varies depending on agency mission. I feel like the agencies that we house, you can talk about law enforcement agencies, laboratories, our land ports of entry, you know, their mission delivery is really not conducive to telework. However, we have a lot of office space. You know, for the office workers, I do think that having this flexibility is that whole work-life balance, and it is something that employees are looking for, the younger generation alike, right? I think we feel that there's a need to have some in-presence staffing in bricks and mortar to help with the coaching, the training of our younger team members. But I do feel like the hybrid solution, we were a heavy telework organization prior to the pandemic, 1 or 2 days a week. And I feel we're still performing at a very high level, and having the right performance metrics in place has allowed, I think, for success in a more robust, I will say, hybrid work environment. For some of our agencies that perform the office work, again, with the technology challenges, they weren't quite equipped initially, but I think they've learned over time. Those people that provide services to the public, they've also enhanced those service delivery methods. So they're more limited in the number of days that they intend to come to the office. It really has been a significant change in how they're looking at mandating the use of bricks and mortar. And I will say the unions that we negotiate all of our workplace agreements with, they're pro telework, very much so for the employees. So it's all part of our negotiations with our telework agreements, but I do feel that having that on-site presence is really important to stay connected. But I do feel that that hybrid work environment definitely is here to stay, and in a little bit more of a, I'll say, robust fashion than it was pre-pandemic. Richard, in terms of recruiting, I just wanted to mention, we've had to really transform our recruiting efforts. We went to virtual recruiting, and now we're doing both again, on-site, on campuses, because there's a lot of students there, but there are also a lot of students that are being educated remotely. So we're trying both things. And we're also posting our job announcements, kind of ongoing job registers, if you will, to try to just get as many people attracted to work for GSA as possible in order for us to deliver to the other federal agencies. So I think transformation at every level of the workforce, hiring, developing employees, and making sure the work-life balance, getting their input, the surveying constantly has been really helpful for us to figure out which direction we need to go in.
Great, thank you, Alison. I'll bring in Julie there. Thank you, Julie, for joining us. Stefan mentioned about the kind of move to activity-based working, and I know that was something that was happening kind of pre-pandemic, and he also touched on what he called the renewed energy in workplaces. Now people are coming in more frequently. Is your kind of planning assumption, for want of a better phrase, that we will settle into some kind of flexible working model that is permanent, and you can make kind of property decisions off the back of that?
Yes, great question. And I'll echo many of the comments that were made by Alison and what's happening in the United States context. There was already a move to work towards more flexible working arrangements pre-pandemic. However, it was in some cases not possible due to the level of IT services that different agencies and government departments had in place to allow for this. So certainly with the pandemic, we probably advanced 10 years in 5, in 3 years in terms of our technological adoption, which has enabled this to become more of a possibility. So in terms of planning, yes, the planning is that it would be hybrid work environment. It's being left up to it is mission driven, to use Alison's term. It is up to each department to figure out how they might best do it and the type of job functions. So we are making property decisions and planning based on that hybrid model. In most cases, what we're seeing for departments, front-facing services, they continued to operate throughout the pandemic 5 days a week or more, depending on what they were doing. Again, with border crossings, that is something that does cover many hours of the day and also of the week. But in office settings, certainly we are moving towards that hybrid model. But where we're seeing most departments settle out is with 2 to 3 days of work in the office, and then the rest teleworking. Some departments are also promoting the opportunity to use a network of spaces. So not only departmental spaces, but what we're branding as the Government of Canada co-working spaces. So we do have a small pilot going on where people can access these spaces, and in general, people are liking them because they are new and well equipped from a technological point of view. I'll pause there and see if there's anything else you wanted me to touch on, or perhaps you want to go to somebody else.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Julie. Really, really interesting. I do get the idea. We've held quite a lot of these webinars in the last kind of 18 months or so looking at this. Now, I do sense that public authorities across the world are kind of moving towards a steady state, shall we say, of flexible working, which I appreciate we might not have reached yet in a lot of places. But I think has already been touched on. Public and private sector are kind of working through this together, and I get the sense that there is a little bit more clarity emerging. I was just about to ask Emmanuel something, but I seem he has dropped off, which is a shame. Hopefully he may be able to rejoin us. There's a question that came in specifically for you, Christian. I think you've typed an answer, but I wanted to put it to you as well. You mentioned the kind of change, the management ratings of happiness with the move to flexible working weren't as high as their other kind of rank and file employees, and then that they moved up. Jane O'Mahony asked, how did you change the management capability to manage by outcomes and outputs rather than presenteeism? Because I do think that really gets to the core of how services are going to be affected, that management switch that is needed.
As I try to reply, I mean, and to respond online, but basically, I mean, the first thing we did is to make hybrid working by design, and that was very important beforehand. We had, of course, some flexibility. You could have got some teleworking, but mostly it was to take care of the children, I would say, on the Wednesday afternoon, whenever necessary, which was not our main objective at the time, but it was in reality what happened. And then what most managers were doing is, well, the colleague has something to do, a task allocated, and the colleague had to catch up. You know, back to the office, coordinating with the others. And now for the manager and for the colleagues, we have 40 to 50% of the staff in a rolling out manner, which is always remote. So you don't have the same colleague all the time next to you. So already you need to connect with them. And of course, you cannot make a follow-up as I said, we have these typical units of 15, 20 colleagues where you could actually monitor the presence. You know, you could check who comes in almost, you know, you're there at 8 in the morning, 8:05, whatever. I mean, you could have made that type of monitoring, which is something which was not helpful to us because we don't mind. I mean, actually, we are not, you know, we don't mind so much the presence, what we wanted the output. So manager already by being forced to look at something else than presence, of course, start to gear themselves towards more what colleagues were doing, were producing rather than where they were and how long they were. And that was quite important. Then why I think we had this massive take on by managers is simply they have seen that they have benefits for themselves because they got flexibility themselves. We didn't treat managers differently from staff. And that is quite important. So, you know, avoiding the rush hour in the morning, starting to work at home, coming later on, working yourself in the office, leaving maybe if you have an urgency or whatever else. And that it was very important. But most importantly, in a momentum where we lack resources, or at least where budget are more difficult to secure, the thing is, for a lot of staff where they were leaving the office, they were not, you know, easily reachable. We could have reached them, but it was difficult. We're not used to do so. So the work was stopping, at least the interaction at work was stopping when the office is, you know, at the end of the office hours. Nowadays, it does not. And as we are an institution driven by urgencies from our main high contracting parties, the member states, we are actually more interested in having an immediate response than having processes managed in a regular basis. And this gain for managers is huge. So that's what explains why managers are taking on that, not having the choice, I must say, and finding benefits. Now, how do you measure output? Well, that's where I said that you need more training. Of course, you have some departments where output can be easily identified. I mean, you have in competition sectors, you know, how many cartels you have busted and so on and so forth. That's relatively easy. The size of the fines. In some, you know, in the HR world, you may have as well here and there some the number of recruitments and so on and so forth. But it's not that. I mean, we of course, as I think was said by Emmanuel, we base ourselves on trust, mostly. We just trust actually the managers to appraise colleagues in a fair manner. And we have, of course, a review process by peers, review process by the hierarchy. So that's the way we organize basically the output management.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'll kind of expand that topic a little bit to Alison, also using one of Jane's questions, which was, how do you ensure people have the time to engage and absorb this amount of change? Have operating models changed? I mean, I don't know if you have any reflections from the GSA's perspective on kind of how management needs to change to reflect this. I do like the idea of mission-based thinking and mission-based delivery in government, because that seems to me that that chimes very nicely with an outcomes-based kind of managerial structure. But is that what you found in the US? Are kind of managers going towards the kind of outcomes and output-based management that Christian was discussing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. It's a super important one to be able to explain why we're doing things or making particular mandates. And in the real estate business that we're in, we're a project-based organization. We don't do anything really individually. We do everything with teams. And reinforcing that point of getting to know your team members has been a key. Like just refreshing project management principles and our global project management approach. It's a team-based approach. It's not individual work. So ensuring that those teams get together and are aligned in the goals and the outcomes for each project. And then also having a pretty tight review process that helps everybody continue to be on the same page with performance metrics. So we really tied it all together. And the explanation was really, we work as teams, team-based approach, and getting to know our colleagues and building relationships is really the key to trusting one another to deliver. So just really trying to stay very grounded in what our core values are, repeating them constantly, and also our strategic plan, keeping that really that messaging very tight. And then also I mentioned before that surveying process, how is this working for you? In some cases, the liberal, there was a more liberal telework posture than what we actually have now. So explaining post-pandemic, why would we be coming in more often than we did pre-pandemic? So consistency became the answer there. 5,500 employees, we couldn't really have 19 different senior executives having different requirements when they're really performing the same mission for the agency. So try to tighten that up and get a little bit more consistent as well. And then just celebrating successes. That's always, so important. Successful outcomes, and having a mechanism to do that for town halls, quarterly town halls, weekly senior leadership team meetings, celebrating successes, talking about our core values, and reinforcing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in everything we do. So I hope that answered the question. I think it all comes back to communication and that feedback loop, and making sure managers and leaders are listening to employees. Even though they might not like the answer, it's important to answer the questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alison. I think that touches on some of Jeremy King's question as well in the session. Yeah, we're hopefully getting to the number of some of these questions. If not, I'm not asking them directly, but please do keep questions coming in. I can see Emmanuel has rejoined us. I wanted to ask you, Emmanuel, I thought it very interesting in your presentation about the extent to which kind of the government in South Africa is kind of maintaining the office kind of based delivery. I wondered whether that was the same throughout South African society, or are you thinking from a public service point of view that you might have to compete with organizations that might offer workers more flexibility, or kind of where it all sits together?
No, thank you for that question, Richard. Yes, it's more a question of having to compete with other public service organizations. It's not just happening within government departments. Yes, government is the biggest employer, I must indicate that. And so it normally acts as like a training ground. So we have to compete, especially when we have to retain expertise within government. So sometimes it's more of then providing like higher salaries, more incentives for people to stay within government. But yeah, the competition can be high because some organizations out there offer much more lucrative incentives. And let me indicate also the difference between public service and municipalities. We're not the same. So the municipal, it's a different level altogether with its own autonomous regulations and financial arrangements, etc. So the competition is quite tight there. And therefore, government, national and provincial government has to actually come to the party by offering much more lucrative incentives for staff. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's good to know that, or interesting to know that it's having that direct impact, and that yeah, it is leading to things like higher salaries, which is a very interesting factor. We have a question which has been addressed to Julie and Christian, and I'll ask Julie first. The question says that Alison mentioned the importance of being in person for connections and collaborations between team members, etc. I think we've all touched on that in various ways, but just to follow up on this, how important is that topic for your organization, and is it a priority or concern among employees? I'll ask Julie that first, how people are kind of feeling as I know Canada's returning to a kind of 2 to 3 days in the office routine.
I think it depends on who you're talking to, whether it's a priority or a concern. For myself, it's been about a year that I've been going into the office for 2 to 3 days a week. And so certainly as more people have been coming in, all of those informal and spontaneous things that don't necessarily happen online, where you have to be very intentional about it. Some of those interactions are coming back, and this talk of productivity and how we measure productivity is very difficult. And so people will say, well, the day I come to the office, I don't feel as productive. And this is, well, it depends how you measure productivity. If it means how many emails you're pushing out, well, maybe you're not pushing out as many emails, but maybe you're having some great informal conversations and connections with other colleagues who you wouldn't necessarily have had. So I think people have to reframe a little bit about their expectations in the office. Yesterday, when I went in, it was a real milestone for me, because a lot of people, as they were coming in, were saying, oh, I'm on MS Teams calls, so how do we make this work? I think that's part of the adaptation as teams figure out how they want to work together. How can they support more of take advantage of their in-presence days? So yesterday was very unique for me, because I had all in-person meetings except for one, and that hadn't happened to me since the beginning of the pandemic. And it was just a really interesting shift to see how that had come together and how that had come together. So I think that we're still in that experimentation phase around the in-office presence, and perception really is people's perceptions where they are in life. Anecdotally have heard that mothers in particular are the ones who are most particularly with young children, are the ones that have indicated that they've appreciated the flexibility of the remote work. So I think that it does show that we do have a burden perhaps on those women in terms of their home responsibilities and work responsibilities. So I think it'll take a while to strike the balance. And again, I think there's both positive and negative associated to the return to workplace. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Kristen, do you want to come in on that point? I thought what you were stressing about the flexibility was really interesting, and I can see how that might really help a lot of public service delivery. But are there Are there any concerns from anyone about possible kind of missed in-person collaboration or things that might be missed if people are working so flexibly?
Yeah, Richard, I think you addressed it to me, this question, so at least. So yes, I mean, we have noticed, I mean, clearly, one of the well, not the biggest criticism, as I said, the criticism is very low in terms of, but some people are more vocal than others. And some people miss more the human interactions than others. Let me give you an example, for example, for newcomers. You have newcomers, you need to stage in new colleagues. Of course, it's a lot more difficult for them if they don't have the mentorship next to them. If you do it remotely at a distance, it's more difficult that you have somebody to you. If you're embedded in a team which works closely together, that helps. So we try actually to have specific sessions for newcomers. We try to create days where people actually join in all the teams, at least every 2 weeks, all teams have to meet together. And at the beginning of our adventure, I call it like that, because we had to change really our way and of working and our culture, actually more fundamentally. What people were asking was, how can we organize the hybrid work? Or how can we organize ourselves to work remotely? It was the main questions. Actually, what was the most important question is, how do you organize yourself when you're in the office? And that is actually the key thing we are working upon, is to do what is useful in the office, what is good for human interaction in the office, what is good for newcomers, what is good as well for offboarding. I mean, when colleagues are leaving, of course, we all want to be there when somebody is leaving the team. So that's where we want to be in the office. And for the rest, of course, we are sometimes, and as Julie said, I mean, you have different type of efficiencies, but for sure, when you work remotely, you're more efficient in terms of pure output. If you have to draft something, I mean, it's better if you're, at home and you can relax and focus on the work. But of course, you have some moment where you need to design the product and what you want and split the work. And that's actually better in the office. So we just try to organize it that way. Of course, there are some hiccups, as there used to be some hiccups before when people were all the time in the office. But globally, we have noted that the interaction is, stepping in.
Great, thank you, Christian. One final question that I'll give to the panel as a kind of launchpad for any closing comments, really, which was from a question from Benedicta Arthur, which is, in those government institutions where there isn't a strong political will to move forward with a hybrid form of operating, what are the best strategies to overcome that? I think we've heard from the presentation today that perhaps that there isn't always strong opposition to this form of working, and that it has been embraced in a lot of governments. But I did wonder whether anybody that was still kind of challenging these moves to flexible working and what you say to overcome them and to get them on board. I'll put that to Alison first, and also feel free to make any closing comments at this juncture, because we are almost up against time.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate this question as well. So thank you. I feel that the conversation to motivate people, our customer agencies, our stakeholders at the highest level, is a conversation about savings. If we can save money on real estate, I mentioned in the presentation, better buildings, reduce the cost to the taxpayers, modernize facilities, and really work on that whole optimization piece, which is that financial piece. I think that's the greatest opportunity for us, delivering, for people, making sure we're providing the tools and the training and the resources for them to do their job, and then really talk about the opportunity, which is, savings in real estate costs and reinvestment costs, presenting those as opportunities to really help agencies move forward. And I think we have some great partnerships already with, I'll use a couple examples. The Department of Housing and Urban Development and reshaping a headquarters building and working with them. Who could they co-tenant with? That's something headquarters agencies maybe hadn't considered in the past. The U.S. Department of Agriculture our Social Security Administration, those partnerships at the beginning of the conversation, from us, a portfolio planning standpoint, identifying those opportunities, creating a plan, and then making it actionable. So thank you for the opportunity to really highlight those important aspects of what we're all facing as leaders in the real estate realm.
Great, thank you, Alison. And Emmanuel, I'll slightly tweak the question for you, because as you set out in your presentation, the South African government's in a slightly different place. But are you looking to make progress towards a more hybrid form of working? You mentioned the barriers that were in place around technology and things like that. But would you like to go further? And do you think the government would like to go further?
Yes, we are looking to go further in working in a hybrid manner. I'll support what Alison said as well in terms of collaborations and partnerships. We are partnering on a number of service delivery projects from national, provincial to municipal level governments. There's a collaborative projects there, especially we call them the district development model, the DDM, where economic development is twined in projects where national, province, and municipalities have to contribute and work together, including the private sector and the community that is affected in the particular local government. So yes, in that kind of situation, working hybrid in a hybrid model is quite important. We cannot all have a meeting, for example, in one central place. So yes, and of course, government is looking at coming up with an automation system that would combine all the efforts across the three spheres, so that makes it much easier to access the systems that are there, and then we can collaborate on a number of these projects. But I must also add, we have a social contract in the form of a public service charter, which binds government employees to providing services to communities. So there's a particular way in which those services must be provided. Secondly, the issue of making resources available at the local level, that's quite important as well, so that we can improve on our connectivity, and having cooperative or joint actions in terms of taking certain services to the public and ensuring that those services are available. Banks can issue, for example, an identity document and so on. So the collaboration does happen, but we'd like to actually improve on all those efforts. Thank you. Thank you,
Emmanuel. And just finally, Christian, I think we're kind of setting out the broadest picture of perhaps the organizational change that's been embedded. Is there any pushback still, or is it vastly accepted? And kind of, if there was pushback when it was being implemented, how did you best overcome it?
Of course, there are pushbacks. I mean, sometimes to the highest level, because some people have the nostalgia of the way we used to work, because it was to some extent for management easier. And to be frank with you, when you ask a question to Alison, how to convince some resistance, some reluctances to move on, Alison replied by mentioning saving. Savings will work with your stakeholders, with the one paying the bill, our member states for us, but probably won't have, I must say, without the COVID, we won't have managed anyone to move to this transitional change so fast. So the best way, honestly, if you don't have a major crisis such as COVID, which obliges you to move, is simply to probably show to people how it works. I won't have seen a full teleworking system. Probably I won't have got the same degree of adhesion that I have now as a manager, because I've seen that people responded positively and the work functioned. So the best is to exchange actually with administrations, show to colleagues, key colleagues, that it works in other places. for me, the best way indeed is, again, communication and communication. And the only response is communication. The more you share, the better you will get as a result.
Great, thank you, Christian. And that's where I'm going to bring today's session to a close. Thank you, everybody, who's been watching along today, for joining us, and thank you very much to our excellent panel, who have really helped bring a fascinating subject to us today, and really have helped me understand where governments are in the development of kind of flexible working policies and the impact on public services. So I hope you found that as useful as I have. We did have a question asking if the recording would be available and the slides. Yes, it will. I should have made that clear at the start. Apologies, but you will receive a recording of this session when it is available in the next few days, and the slides will be available. There'll also be a report on this session in the next few weeks too. But before both of those things, there'll be a survey going into your inbox very shortly to get your thoughts on today's webinar, and it would help me and the team here at Global Government Forum to make sure that we're providing the best content for you all if you were able to fill that in. And any ideas on topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars would also be welcome. We do run a wide range of webinars here at GGF, and one upcoming one that might be of interest to you is a goldmine of insight, how governments are using data to deliver better services, on the 18th of April. Please do join us for that. That's also going to be an excellent conversation. So thanks once again to everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at another one of our webinars soon. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you.